Sorry about that, Morgan. No, you're good. We're fine. We're great. Welcome everyone to Senate Education this Thursday, March 21st, 3:20. Again, we're so pleased to have Brooke Olson Farrell, the superintendent of Slate Valley School District, with us. And Brooke, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for having me. So for the record, I'm Brooke Olson Farrell, a veteran educator of 25 years. I've dedicated 7 years as the superintendent of schools in the Slate Valley Unified Union School District. And I'm grateful for the chance to address the unprecedented statewide budget failures, particularly within the context of our district, which serves Fairhaven, Castleton, Benson, West Haven, and Hubbardton in Rutland County, along with Orwell and Addison County. Unfortunately, this year, our school district is among those that did not pass a budget. The results were 1,004 yes to 1,468 no. The budget failed by a margin of 464, which is the largest margin ever recorded for our district. And this marks our fourth budget failure in the past 5 years. I should note that historically, over decades in this district, we do have difficulty passing school budgets. The failed budget aimed to address critical needs and enhance the overall educational experience for our students. According to Act 127, our district is classified as advantaged. We are one of the lowest spending districts in the state and also one of the most impoverished. Our community seems to pride itself on being at the bottom in terms of spending statewide. We always aim to be fiscally responsible and conservative, so much so that of the 107 reporting districts, Slate Valley Unified Union School District is the 16th lowest in the state, yet our community still cannot support the presented budget. While the outcome was not what we had hoped for, we respect and acknowledge the democratic nature of our community. Our foremost priority is providing the best education for our students. Despite efforts to find alternative solutions post-failure, passing a budget in our community's current climate poses grave challenges. Over the last 5 years, we've reduced over 28 positions, closed a school, and experienced a decrease in education spending. Our projected homestead tax rate in FY23 was $2.08, but due to Act 46, it was reduced to $1.27, and it has continued to fall. While Act 46 was a partial success statewide, I dare say a success in our community, it did not go far enough, and local communities do not have the will to see it through. This would require tough decision-making that must come from leadership at the top, as we must address further school consolidation as a state. Contracts for staffing need to be issued by April 1st. After that date, there will be little to no movement in staff reductions, only through attrition. If this situation persists, the only items we could consider cutting would be transportation, extracurricular activities, maintenance, and after-school programs. However, all of these have direct negative impacts on students and drive them yet further away from equitable outcomes. Our district has been extremely active in the community in terms of outreach and messaging, but unfortunately, the message is not resonating. Many are concerned about cost and seek tax relief, while others argue that we aren't spending enough and are depriving students of essential resources. This has polarized the community, as evidenced in our recent Finance Committee and board meetings. The majority of the Finance Committee opposed any budget cuts, feeling that our students would be further disadvantaged. Conversely, another board member advocated for over $1 million in cuts. The conversation was dynamic and emotional. Ultimately, the Finance Committee recommended a new budget for a vote on April 11th with a $150,000 cut to the expenditure budget. This results in a $1.15 equalized homestead tax rate, which is a decrease of 1.31%. One member dissented in that approval. This new budget was voted on, and an April 11th revote was warned at our March 18th board meeting. Our education spending per equalized pupil is slated to be $11,321. The district directly to our north, Addison Central, handily passed a budget with spending of $16,099. This is illustrative of the huge inequities within our current state system. At this time, we have at least one board member who has stated that he will publicly advocate against the passage of the budget in the next vote and is staying true to his word. None of this is beneficial for our students, our staff, and our communities. It is the state's responsibility to provide equitable education for all students in Vermont. As a whole, we are facing unprecedented challenges statewide with staff recruitment and retention, sharp increases in dysregulated students with no or very limited resources to address these needs. Our district, like many others, has a high number of students on plans, such as individualized education plans, 504, or educational support team plans, roughly 40% of our student population. Again, not unlike other districts in the state. Coupled with this, over 20% of our instructional staff are on emergency or temporary educator licenses. The system is broken, and as a school system, we find ourselves caught in the middle between the public sentiment and state leadership. Questions that I would ask you to ponder. What are leaders going to do to address this current crisis? How is the leadership going to address the inordinate amount of social services that schools have been forced to assume due to lack of capacity and community partnerships? There are no wait lists for schools to put students on. Many of their services are entitlements, which schools must provide or face legal action. How is school infrastructure crisis going to be addressed? How is the legislature going to address the real possibility that some schools may never have a passed budget? What does the state consider good enough in terms of a quality education? Are we okay with some districts spending $16,000 per pupil while others can't pass a budget at $11,000? What is the vision for public education in Vermont? And where is the leadership and support from the Agency of Education? We all know that we didn't get here overnight, and I know I speak for many of my colleagues when I say we're committed to finding solutions beyond quick fixes as some systems struggle to maintain viability. And I don't think this is hyperbole. From a crisis, opportunity can emerge. Let's seize it to enact meaningful and responsible change.
Thank you very much. Quick question, did your budget go up, increase, or decrease?
So the actual expenditure budget went up, but because of our long-term, our spending per long-term weighted pupil, it actually decreased.
Senator Kewah, please.
So the tax rate, the overall tax rate decreased before you added the CLA on. And then in terms of the CLA, some of our towns saw a 7% increase up to 20% was the top one. So 7 to 20, depending on the town.
Brooke, do you mind if I?
No, please.
I really appreciate your testimony and you coming in, and I'm so glad you're gonna be the new head of the BSA. That is very exciting. Maybe head isn't the right word, chair? Chair, I think.
President-elect, but I've got a couple of years. Amy Minor's the president currently. So.
Okay, okay. I am just looking for a little bit of clarity because I can't speak to your CLA situation. Right. I did just print out a document from the Joint Fiscal Office.
Yep.
And according to this chart, it looks like your percentage change in district share of statewide weighted pupil count actually increased 9%. So
correct. It increased 9%, which decreased our tax rate. We're getting more credit for our students.
Right, so that's a positive, a net positive.
That's a positive for us, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, I just wanted to confirm. Thank you very much. Okay.
Other questions? Please.
So Brooke, if I could, given your current position as superintendent and your president-elect of the Superintendent's Association, and your comment about the vision, where do you think the best source of vision is these days? Because none of us are seeing it.
So I would love to say, and I'm speaking for myself right now and not on behalf of the VSA, but I would love to see a vision come from a Secretary of Education and the Agency of Education and even the governor and the legislature. What do we want for public education in Vermont? What does that look like? And then how do we put the resources in place to achieve those goals? I'm not really sure. Are we going with fewer schools, newer and fewer schools? Are we, more focused on the privatization of education? I mean, what is the vision? I'm not sure what it is.
Thank you. Great.
I agree too.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well, and hopefully, I mean, I think a couple of things are happening. I think we all probably have our own opinions in terms of how to move things forward for public education in the state. And it is complicated. I mean, we have a lot of schools, we have some students who are thriving, we have some students who are far from thriving, and everything in between. We have to start to look at, I think, teacher salaries across the state, teacher contracts. I think it really is very much an open conversation, and the opportunity in some ways to start with a, no pun intended, given where you're from, but a clean slate. And really, especially now that, we are starting soon with a new Secretary of Education. And so when we have an opportunity to meet him or her in the coming days, weeks ahead in person, hopefully, we will share that with this person as well. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Please, Senator Gillick.
One last comment. I never get to speak on the floor as much as I want to, so it all gets pent up and then I just let loose in this committee. I just wanted to say thank you. As a superintendent, your job is so incredibly difficult, and I live in Burlington and I've watched what our superintendent has had to face between losing our high school and the pandemic. Like day one, when he started his job, we went into, lockdown. So it's, I understand how incredibly difficult it is. I hope I get to continue to serve on the Ed committee. If I am lucky enough to get reelected, I hope I can continue doing this work, because one thing I would love to see is more communication with superintendents. I would love to see your organization really help inform what we do. Because we're working in this little bubble in the legislature, we're not necessarily on the ground, living your experience day to day. So I will say I look forward to collaborating with you. I'll be optimistic and say that. And again, just really look forward to hearing more of your voice and the voice of the VSA. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. And we are more than happy to collaborate in any of this. And I think we want to, and we want good education policy.
Please, Senator Gillick.
Yeah, Brooke, one comment, one question. So I've in my professional career, I've always found it beneficial that in the absence of a plan, I like to develop a plan, inject it, and let people react to it. And then we come up with an end product, which eventually everybody lives with. And so leads me to my question. Does the Superintendent's Association have an intention to begin to kind of form a vision of their own to offer, or at least, I guess, offer for a conversation?
Again, I think we'd be happy to partner in any of that work. But we don't have necessarily anything like ready to roll out. But I think we would be happy to be partners in that work and give input into that, certainly.
And I think one of the biggest challenges is we have so many blueprints in this state for health, for taxes, I bet we even have one for education, is the legislature changes and the ideas disappear. So in some ways, even if we put forward some, guiding principles, it is likely in some, it's going to be, I think, an evolving document one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just think the field needs a little bit of direction and we can't, I think superintendents and districts are feeling a little caught in the middle between their constituencies and the state and how to navigate that. And we, struggle with school closures and that the micro control, right? Almost, in local control, and that's preventing us, from recognizing efficiencies within the system.
Yeah. That in itself, what you just said, is incredibly helpful for us to know. So I appreciate that. Okay, thank you so much. And it was great.
Thank
We
you.
may have you back as we continue this conversation a little bit next week or in the future, but this has been very helpful. And
All right.
congratulations.
Thank you so much.
St. James Legislative Council. Nice to meet you. Beth, yep. Jim was my predecessor, who I think you worked with a couple of times. Yep, nice to meet you.
Professor,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm fine. Chair Campion,
Please join us.
feel like an old horse coming back to the barn. You guys have been moving.
You're well?
I am well,
The
yeah.
judge is well?
Yeah.
Good. Good to see you. We'll just go around before you get started and we'll all introduce ourselves. Please go ahead.
Senator Terry Williams representing Rutland.
Nice to meet you,
Nice to
Senator
meet you.
Williams.
Dave Weeks from Proctor representing Rutland County.
Nice to meet you, Senator Weeks.
Nice to meet you.
Chair
Good to
Campion.
see you.
Yeah.
Martine Larocque, I live in Burlington and I represent Chittenden Central.
Who did you replace, Senator?
Well, there was this reshuffling of the districts, so I didn't really replace anyone. Is that fair to say?
So it would have either been could have been Sorokin or could have been
Chris
Pearson.
Pearson or Soraka, but we moved things around, so it was
Oh,
suddenly this
Very nice to meet
empty
you,
space.
Senator.
Thank you.
Not Hashim, good to see you. Wyndham County.
Hashim from where?
Wyndham County.
Wyndham, okay. So I brought copies.
Yeah, of your testimony. We have it. We also have it.
So it might be convenient if you want to refer to it. This is, I see that you already have
We already have
it.
it. We have a
I'm a,
Cracker Jack committee assistant.
Yeah.
So that's a little extra for you. Appreciate it. Great. So you know the situation that we're contemplating here. We'd like to alter, we're considering altering the State Board of Education in different ways. There's some of us who would really like to alter it, which is myself. And then there's this proposal to sort of adjust the membership a little bit. And this is the proposal right now before us. We've heard, as you know, from Jay Johnson, governor's attorney, on it. And Ms. Johnson raised issues of constitutionality. And so that is why we called you and look forward to hearing your thoughts on whether or not, if we were to move in this direction, the one that's on the table right now, I think we'll have other options to choose from. Is it constitutional?
so, my name is Peter Teachout. I teach constitutional law at Vermont Law School. I know quite a bit about it, but the Supreme Court is always changing it, so it keeps me on my toes. I appreciate the opportunity to testify for this committee. I never know if my testimony will be helpful, but I do the best I can, normally what is fairly short notice. So
Yes, and I do apologize for that. You mentioned that, yes.
I know that's a reality under which all of the committees here have to work. So I think maybe I will start by saying, in light of legal counsel for the governor's testimony, I think it was last week, I have been asked whether I believe the state could adopt the proposed changes to the method for appointing members to the State Board of Education as proposed in Senate Bill 203 without violating the separation of powers clause in the Vermont Constitution or any other constitutional provision. I've taken a look at it, and my answer is yes. I think the legislature can adopt the changes proposed in Senate Bill 203 without any serious constitutional barriers to doing so. If I had to summarize the basic gist of the reasons for that conclusion, I elaborate upon the reasons in my written testimony. I would like to share with you a story that you probably already know about the Vermont farmer who's asked if he believes in baptism. Important theological question.
Yes.
Religious sects divided down the middle, goes right to the heart of your deepest religious belief. So this guy comes up to the farmer, he says, "Do you believe in baptism?" Farmer pauses for a moment, and he says, "Yeah, I've seen it done." Get it? Why that story? Because one of the primary bases for my believing that the state can adopt the changes proposed in S203, which proposes dividing responsibility for appointing members to the State Board of Education. One of the bases for believing that the state can do it without running into any serious constitutional problems is because I've seen it done. I've seen it done in the Vermont context. There's already a statute on the books that divides responsibilities for selecting members to the judicial nominating board, with the governor getting to appoint some members. Senate elect, I think, 3 members, House elect 3 members. So you already have in Vermont, without any constitutional challenge, a system for dividing responsibility for selecting members to a state board. And the example of the judicial nominating. There may be other examples, but that's one that I am familiar with. I also thought it was really interesting to share with you that material in the appendix, the matrix of what other states have done throughout the country in the way of selecting members to state boards of education. And if you look through that appendix, every single state is listed there. You will find that probably a majority of the states adopt the process that we've always used in Vermont. Governor appoints subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. But you'll also find at least a handful of states that do divide responsibility for making appointments to the State Board of Education. Some states go all the way to the other end, in which the legislature makes all the appointments. But some states divide responsibility for making appointments to state boards of education among different constituencies, including different constituencies within state government, that is, governor, House, and Senate, along the lines proposed by S203. So there's another example. I know it may seem a little simplistic to you, but it gives me confidence because I've seen it done. Now, in my written testimony, I elaborate on a number of other reasons why I think there are no constitutional problems, and I'm happy to answer questions if you would like, but in light of the hour, I think you get the gist of my testimony, and I'm available to answer questions if you have them.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for being here. I am not a lawyer, so, and I'm quite ignorant of a lot of, the law, so.
Well, she is not really ignorant of the
Well,
law.
I am. One claim that was made in the testimony was that if the legislature is to appoint some folks to this board, that they would become agents of the legislature. Is that something that you see to be true?
I do not think that is a very accurate description realistically or legally. You are not responsive to the legislature legally once you've been appointed as a member to the board. And you are not responsive politically, realistically in practice.
Right, okay, good.
You operate as a board over there and you perform your functions and any basis for your having been appointed to the board.
Okay, that was my,
It doesn't impact the
Right,
way
thank
you
you.
perform your duties.
that was my instinct, but I had no scholarship to back that up, so thank you. My only other reaction to some of the testimony that I recall was a reference to private interest and we do name, you know, certain members of the board like to be a special educator or a former special educator. There's a parent, there's a principal or a former principal or something. I don't have it in front of me, but I mean, are these considered special interests when you're basically asking for folks who have experience in the field of education? Is that considered special interest?
Again, I don't think that's a very helpful or accurate way of thinking about it. There are criteria, suggested criteria for selection of those members to serve on the Board of Education, and you will find them in the proposed legislation itself. It's also in the existing law. In the appointment of non-student members, priority shall be given to selection of persons with a demonstrated commitment to ensuring quality education for Vermont students. That is criteria number one. And then it goes on to say, to the extent possible, the members shall represent the state's geographic, gender, racial, and ethnic diversity. Not a mandate. Just as you look out there, you see a board that consists simply of all old white men, you say, well, we got 3 candidates here, they're all equally qualified. Let's see if we can mix it up a little. I think there's virtue in having members of the board represent different sectors of the Vermont community. And what is current law and what S203 also would continue would be to try to encourage that. It's not a question, it seems to me, of undue influence by private factions or private interests.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for remembering those questions. Senator Hershey.
Thank you for your testimony today. I watched the testimony, unfortunately, I wasn't here in person, but one statement that we heard was that this bill would usurp power from the governor. Is that, am I recalling that?
I do remember the word usurped. Yes.
And it's my understanding that the State School Board of Education is not a core function of the executive branch. Is that correct? That it's not a core component of the executive branch?
So, Senator Hushing, there are 2 dimensions to your question, as I understand it. One is does the State Board of Education somehow belong or is particularly associated with the functions performed by one branch of government as opposed to the major branches? And the answer is the State Board of Education, like many administrative agencies today, really lives in the middle of the traditional branches of government. It performs executive functions when it implements the laws adopted by the legislature. It performs legislative functions when it engages in rulemaking, which is one of the primary responsibilities of the state. And rulemaking is a form of lawmaking. It's a legislative, quasi-legislative function. And interestingly, the State Board of Education also performs quasi-judicial functions when it hears appeals from decisions by the Secretary of the Agency of Education. So it doesn't belong to no particular, it doesn't sort of fit neatly. The functions it performs don't fit neatly or align with those performed by any other of the particular branches of government. The second part of your question was somehow in adopting this legislation, would the legislature be usurping or encroaching upon the powers of the governor? I think that's a fair question, although I don't think it's a serious one after you really think about it, but I've addressed that in my written testimony by saying, let us look together at the provision in the Vermont state constitution that says what the powers of the governor are with respect to making appointments. And the language is set forth at the top of page 7. This is from section 20 of chapter 2 of the Vermont Constitution. It said the governor, and in the governor's absence, the lieutenant governor shall have the power to commission all officers and to appoint officers That would be to the, I say there's a question of whether officers includes board members, and I think that's a serious question, but conceding that just for purposes of argument, assuming the governor has the power to appoint board members under that provision, you have to go on and read the rest of the sentence. The rest of the sentence says, the governor shall have the power to appoint officers, quote, except where provision is or shall be otherwise made by law or this frame of government. And what that means, in essence, is except where the state legislature provides otherwise. So the Constitution clearly confirms that power to appoint will always be subject to this condition. It's got the power, it's sort of like a default, power to appoint unless the legislature provides otherwise. But if the legislature provides otherwise, as it is authorized to do by this provision, it is not usurping the power of the governor. It is not encroaching upon the power of the governor. It is exercising its constitutional responsibility.
Thank you.
Senator Weeks.
Yeah, along the same lines, Professor, so State Board of Education is currently comprised of all governor nominees. Correct. The Secretary of Education is also a governor appointee.
That's my understanding.
So is there a conflict if the legislature shifts more power or control to one of those two entities over the other, either they're both appointed by the governor?
Well, that's a good question, Senator Weeks. The Vermont Constitution does not give the governor the power to say anything about the power to appoint the Secretary of Education. The Agency of Education is a legislative creation. The Office of Secretary is a legislative creation. In my view, there's no constitutional reason why you have to keep on providing the governor with the power even to appoint the secretary, but it probably makes good sense since that's a major state office. With respect to the board itself, members of the board, that's the way we've been doing things, but there's no constitutional reason why the state has to continue doing so if it thinks another approach would better serve the interests of the people of the state. And it's interesting that S203 contemplates a kind of orderly process of transition. As members' terms expire, then the governor is first in line, gets to replace those with his appointees. As the next set of board members retire, I can't remember, I think the Senate probably is next in line, gets to make the next appointments. But that's the way it works. No constitutional problem with that. If you don't think it's a wise way to run the state's business, you're not required to do it, but there's no constitutional impediment to moving toward a divided approach to the appointment of members of the State Board of Education.
Other questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
If this is your testimony that's done sort of at the last minute, very impressive.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
and I do apologize again, as soon as you said that,
Senator Kulik, every Tuesday morning, I get a call from some committee up here saying, we're gonna have.
We need you Wednesday."
Meeting tomorrow morning, could you testify as if this stuff grows on trees?
This is amazing. It would take me months to do this, so.
And
thank
it
you.
is tremendously helpful, the what you attach, because we have been talking a lot about what are other states doing, so that was really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Teacher, before you leave, would you remind me, were the teach outs here when Samuel K. Champlain arrived?
So you can read this in the Vermont Historical Quarterly in an article written by, I think, a remote relative, which reads as follows.
Mhm.
When Champlain came down from Canada to discover the lake that now bears his name, he found on one of the islands St. Francis Indians and a white man. And the white man's name was Teacher. I don't believe a word of it. But
Well, I do, I just want you to.
Vermont Historical Quarterly
They have
documented.
it, they
He
have it.
claimed to get it from a famous Vermont historian named Hemingway.
Huh.
Abby Hemingway, but then conveniently all her papers burned, so we can't track.
Oh my God.
Well, if you happen to see my friend Senator Chittenden on the way out, just remind him of that story. I'd like to know that the teach outs were here for the Chittendens.
Chair Campion, I saw Thomas Chittenden when I was walking in. He didn't even recognize me.
It was pretty cold out there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Really helpful.
This St. James.
Let's don't hesitate to be.
Oh, we're on the same page.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Maybe one way to start the question is, do you agree with Senator Teachout's assessment? Do you have any concerns or questions for us to be thinking about?
No, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel, I think just in general, I agree with the premise that what S-203 proposes to do, I do not see as a separation of powers issue. I agree, I don't disagree with anything Professor Teachout just said, but I would be remiss if I didn't start this conversation by saying if we're talking about a separation of powers issue,
Yeah.
we should all acknowledge that the branch of government that would ultimately decide if something is unconstitutional is not you.
Right.
It's not the executive branch, it's the judicial branch, right? So, we can talk about this and I can give you my legal opinion. You just heard Professor Teachout's legal opinion. You've heard the administration's legal opinion. At the end of the day, none of those matter. It matters a court might think. So I just want to be clear about that. And that goes for everything we talk about in here, right?
Sure.
I can never guess what a court is going to do with something. But I just thought since this is a specific separation of powers conversation, it would, you know, we got to acknowledge the third branch there, the judicial branch.
Yes. Thank you. Have any of these challenges, because I know that this has been in the water, at least since for a while, maybe even different administrations say, oh, no. This is a separation of powers issue. Have they gone to the courts, some of these issues, and have the courts weighed in?
Yes,
Okay.
many years ago. I'm talking 40s.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Senator Kewett.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
I just,
I mean, I'd just like to know what the decision was, even though it was a while ago.
yeah, so there's not, I can't point to one specific case that's directly on point, right?
Okay.
The Supreme Court of Vermont, and we are talking about Vermont's constitution, okay?
Okay.
Not the United States Constitution. There are some helpful analogies if you are looking at US Constitution, case law, or history. In comparison to Vermont's constitution, case law and history, but they are not apples to apples comparison. one of the main reasons for that is the executive branch under the US Constitution, the president is the supreme power as the executive. The Vermont Constitution has several constitutional officers in it, right? It's not just the governor, treasurer, it's the secretary of state. And you all have created the position of the attorney general. So the executive branch in Vermont is not, when we're looking at an analysis of a separation of powers issue, it's not a one-to-one analysis or analogy. We're looking at separation of power cases or examples in the US under the Constitution, US Constitution. I am not, let's see, I am not sure that there has been, I have not found a Vermont Supreme Court case that was directly on point about necessarily appointment power, but certainly about removal power. There has been a case on that. And the Vermont Supreme Court is clear that deciding who can remove someone who's appointed to a board or commission is a policy decision for the legislature. And that case is from Peter v. P. I'm just looking for the year. 1943. Where did you get that, Senator Hashim? One of there's a couple ways to read that. The fact that that case is from 1943, I'm not finding anything that's making its way to the courts since then. There could just may not have been an appetite to challenge anything, but the debate may have been simmering under the surface all along. Or it could just be that it's so well settled.
Yeah.
That no one is advancing that argument to the courts. I think that is a totally subjective opinion on why the case law is not recent, right? This is not something that the courts are constantly being asked to look at. In addition to the Judicial Nominating Committee, there are several other boards in the state that have a mixed appointment authority structure. Some of them don't even have the governor appointing anyone. Commission on Women, State Ethics Commission, the Racial Equity Advisory Panel, and the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Board all either have the governor and the legislature appointing members, or like, for example, the State Ethics Commission, neither the legislature nor the governor appoints anyone. And for the Racial Equity Advisory Panel, both the Senate and the House appoint members, but and the governor does, but the Human Rights Commission also does, and the Supreme Court also does.
Senator Gillick, please.
My question, do you mind?
Oh, that wasn't your question?
No,
Oh, okay.
no. Mine's a little stale now, but I will go back to it. You had said that we have now Professor Teachout's opinion, we have your opinion, and we have the governor's opinion around the constitutionality piece. We still have not received written testimony from the legal counsel. Is videotaped oral argument considered just, is that like a legally binding?
Nothing that's happening here is legally binding.
Okay,
So
so
the
that-
governor signs it, or
Is it
you
an
all pass a
official-
override veto.
Is it an official stance?
That would be for them to decide. That would, I mean, there's nothing in your rules that requires any, so you don't swear me in, right? Every time I sit
Right.
down, you're not swearing me in. I've never seen you swear in another witness in this committee. And I appear in front of you all of the time, without any written talking points. I have all my notes typed up that I
Yeah.
can, run through spell check and you can slap up, but I think it's whatever is most helpful to you.
Right, I guess all I'm saying is that, was that really the governor's opinion? I mean, that was one person's opinion that we heard that day, we don't have it in writing. I'm just not clear that,
I think that would be a question that ultimately you would need to pose to the administration and ask them if that was their official opinion.
Okay.
She is she is
She
the
is counsel.
governor's legal counsel.
I mean, I would say yes, if I didn't.
But she was accompanied by
okay,
political, right?
right.
But yeah, we can discuss. And Morgan did send a reminder yesterday.
Mhm.
I will note, this debate happened relatively recent history in the Cannabis Control Board. And there is written testimony from the administration on the same issue, posted on the legislature's website.
Would you mind emailing that to us? That'd be great. Senator Machine.
Yeah, more comment. I mean, I feel like. At least in my opinion, it's obvious that we as the legislature. Can change laws that we've already enacted. Rather the real question that we're grappling with, or that we should be grappling with, is whether or not this is something the administration likes or doesn't like. It's not. Yeah, that's it.
I'm sorry, I don't follow.
It's, in my opinion, it's very clear that we, as the policy-making body of the branch of government, can make new policy
All
or
the time. It's
modify.
not- Yeah, with the
old
second
policy.
part, yeah.
That's not the question, in my opinion, that we should continue grappling with, is I think it's very clear that the legislature can make laws. I think the question rather is, does the governor like it or not like it? And so that really, I mean, that's really what I think it's,
Mhm.
that's the underlying question, that we're not talking about, but rather it's, we can make policy, so I don't know. Yeah. That's it, right.
So you got two branches of government that disagree, but the decider would be judicial, right? If it goes that far.
If it goes that far, the judiciary is not out there saying,
Right.
that's an issue I wanna decide,
Right.
that's an issue I wanna
So
decide, right?
somebody would have to push it.
Correct. But there's disagreement about the law between literally everyone, right? At all times. So.
So
Yes,
if we want to advance this bill. Somebody has to decide, right?
Sure, yeah, like any bill, yeah. Please.
No, it's just, wanted to go back to Senator Sheeves' comment. From my perspective, that was the executive branch's response to the question. That was an agent of the executive branch with an answer to a question that we proposed. I'm not
It
sure.
seemed more like they were stating that they felt it was unconstitutional and it would be usurping power.
In their opinion,
Right,
But not whether or not the governor would like it or not.
well, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess it's, that's inherent in what they were, that's an
I think
inference,
it's
but
pretty straightforward that they don't like the legislation as written. And they were trying to fortify their position with the fact that it was, from their perspective, conceived to be unconstitutional.
right, so in my opinion, when something is clearly constitutional, it's less so that we should be discussing the merits of the constitutionality, but the rationale behind why all of this power should be in the governor's office as opposed to being balanced between the branches.
Senator, if you and let's kind of wrap, because we're gonna have more time on this, but we do have one more witness and I want to keep her waiting.
No, it was something about, it's gone, sorry,
Okay,
it's gone.
Senator
so
Williams, final?
if we legislatively pass this bill, it goes to the governor and he vetoes it, and support it.
Maybe.
So where are we?
Well, that's a conversation, yeah, we can have later next week and figure it out. The St. James, thank you very much. We're gonna continue this conversation. If people want to hear from anybody else on this, just let me know.
I will.
But I have a couple of other,
You wanna hear back to the governor?
Yeah, she basically said, we'll get an opinion.
Yeah, well, that is a good
Okay.
point, and we do have, Mr. Feldman, who is working with the governor's office, getting something right.
Okay.
Ms. Turner,
And for the record, I'd like to go forward with this bill.
right. That's why if you do have other people that you want to have testify, please let me know.
Sorry,
Well,
one last question.
yeah.
To testify specifically on unconstitutionality.
no, I
Or
think
just-
that's it. And anything else on
Okay.
the bill,
Thank you.
be great. We'll pick it up next week. Yes,
Well,
thank you for coming in.
thank you for having me.
There was an email exchange about the State University possibly selling, moving forward on some buildings, and Senator Williams reached out to me last night. I reached out to you. You were incredibly kind to call me right up and sort of explain the situation. And Senator, I think we'd all like to know a little bit more background and situation, just to answer any questions. Rumor mill goes quickly, and let's see what we can figure out.
Thanks, folks. Drake Turner, Director of Governmental and External Affairs for the Vermont State College System. Thanks for making the time today. I have some notes just typed up here because I've been learning more about this week as well. I get up to speed in this position. So first thing I want to say when it comes to Vermont State University is that we are and continue to be committed to 5 thriving physical campuses. I know that's, I don't think we can state that enough. So federal funds that are secured through congressionally directed spending are one tool we have to help us imagine new and exciting projects to secure that vibrancy. And we are and have been pursuing every option that's at our fingertips when it comes to transforming the Vermont State colleges and really ensuring vibrancy on all of our campuses. One of the important ways that we do that is making sure we leave no stone unturned when it comes to our partnerships, public and private funding, federal and state funding and grants. And everyone really is at the table to make sure that transformation is successful because we know how important this institution, these two institutions and the system is to Vermonters. So earlier this week, we were excited to learn that our partners at the Lamoille Housing Partnership have received federal funding through congressionally directed spending for an important project that meets a tremendous need in the Johnson community. But I want to be clear that it is their project and their funding. So if you have more questions about their plans for the project, I would suggest reaching out to the Lamoille Housing Partnership. My understanding is that Vermont State University's involvement would extend to identifying potential space for the project, but it is not our project. And I also want to be really clear that no decisions have been made regarding the sale of any buildings on the Johnson campus related to this project. And in some of the work I did this week just to learn a little bit of the backstory, I mentioned this to you, Senator Campion. It's my understanding that there were some previous conversations about this project back in 2020, 2021. And I believe the conversations at that time involved the potential sale of McClellan Hall, which is a building on the Johnson campus that is sort of adjacent to campus and that has been vacant for several years. But again, as we currently stand, no decisions regarding that building or any other buildings have been made in relationship to this project. I am learning more about the congressionally directed spending process. I think it can be pretty unpredictable and especially in this current budget construct, sometimes funding comes through and sometimes it doesn't. But from where we stand, this project may have potential for future action. However, that will be determined after further conversations and engagement with our campus community and with community partners. And we have actually been working on plans to pursue a really robust engagement process with our internal and external communities all across our 5 Vermont State University campuses this fall, which we're really excited about. And that's something we definitely want to keep you all apprised of. So in terms of next steps on this project, the Lamoille Housing Partnership will need to determine, how they want to move this project forward. Because it's their project and their funding, and we're definitely excited to work with them and see what could be possible. Again, in consultation with, our
many various stakeholders. But I do want to just take this opportunity while you have me here, to share some of the positive impacts that we've felt from congressionally directed spending.
Can you just wait 1 second? I just
Sure.
want Senator Hewitt to lose thought on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I to have it.
Pivot.
Can I just, for clarity, was the initial question that asking if the state colleges need legislative approval to sell a building? Is that the question that's on the
I was
table?
led to believe we do. Title 16
Okay.
requires legislative approval for any
And that-
sale of any property on the Vermont State Colleges.
That may be, I think that's probably a better question for legislative council than for me.
Yep.
And we have good news because legislative council is right
Yeah.
here, so I don't know, so Ms. St. James can work on that if she doesn't mind taking a look. Yes,
And there was another piece of property too, the Vermont National Guard is gonna be building, I think, on Northern University.
I'm not exactly sure what the status of that is, so I can look into it and get back to you. And I think you all, I believe we've been in conversation with you, this session and in previous sessions that, I believe all of our campuses at Vermont State University are significantly overbuilt for the current enrollment that we have. So I know there are conversations to have, with students, faculty, staff, our communities, about how to ensure our campuses are really thriving. And also with the communities in which our campuses reside, to see how potentially some spaces that aren't currently being used could contribute to solving some of the issues that we see across Vermont. So those are really important conversations to have. But we are not making decisions without speaking to our stakeholders who really need to have a seat at that table as these discussions are happening about how to ensure thriving campuses.
So I think the general concern is that if in fact property of the Vermont State Universities are being sold, there are infrastructure in my constituency that counts at the university, that there's infrastructure that needs funding down there. And, it appears that we're selling off the assets piecemeal. And that's not my words, those are from people I talked to that are in my district.
Right.
anything else? I'm gonna look until when Miss St. James is ready. Are you ready? Okay, would you mind responding? Do you mind responding to there?
Sure,
Okay.
that's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. I had no idea you all were gonna talk about this, so this
It was
is
very loud.
No, so I'm just prefacing that with this is on the fly research. So in Title 16, the Vermont State Colleges chapter, section 2188 is entitled Property Transactions, and it says, any sale, lease, demolition, or disposal of property by the Vermont State Colleges Corporation shall comply with the requirements of 32 VSA 962. That is in the taxation and finance title, in the state bonds subchapter, under debts and claims chapter, and this is what section 962 says. Any entity receiving an appropriation financed with proceeds of tax exempt bonds of the state shall notify and receive approval from the state treasurer and the secretary of administration at least 90 days prior to finalizing an agreement with a non-public or for-profit entity to rent, lease, sell, or otherwise dispose of property financed with those proceeds. And then there's some language about IRS compliance and some other language that may not be super relevant to this conversation. And I'm just looking. So that's what I am finding immediately. So the legislature's not implicated in either of those statutes.
But they would have to check in with the Secretary of Administration and its Treasurer's Office.
Under 32 VSA 962. There would have to be approval from the state treasurer and the secretary of administration if there were certain facts in place surrounding the transaction, right? It had to have been financed with proceeds from tax exempt bonds. And the transaction would be with a non-public or for-profit entity. And then I think that is the extent of where I feel comfortable kind of navigating whether this section would apply to what you all are taking testimony on.
So it doesn't have to have the approval of the legislature.
Doesn't sound like it's the approval of the legislature. Sounds like Ms. St. James will continue to explore that. Looks like
Okay.
certain actions may or decisions may cause the Secretary of Administration and the State Treasurer to get involved. And that is something that you can all.
Yeah, if folks have specific questions about other buildings, please let me know, but I do just want to be clear that we want to engage with our campus communities about how to ensure that these physical spaces are contributing to a positive educational environment for students and a positive working environment for faculty and staff. Those are really important conversations to have about this year, next year, 5 years from now, excuse me, 10 years from now. And so we're really trying to think intentionally about how to create authentic and genuine opportunities for engagement so that we can think about these physical spaces, but also work to continue to build the community of Vermont State University. And the more input, the better. So we are planning on embarking on that process in the fall. So when it comes to this building or other buildings, this is not something that we will be making decisions on without robust engagement from our campus communities.
So congressionally mandated, I think they're directed. Does that have to do with the National Guard Bureau? Because they would be a DoD entity.
I believe this is a separate, so the congressionally directed spending request that I am speaking about was announced earlier this week, and it's for the Lamoille Housing Partnership to, I think, pursue senior housing and a health clinic. So I think that's separate from the National Guard piece, but I'm happy to do a little bit more research
Okay.
and follow up with you on that one.
Thank you.
Right, and I will also say, we received a very generous congressionally directed spending award that was secured by Senator Leahy last year, $6.3 million for our nursing expansion, which I know we've talked to you all about. Part of that expansion is a build out of some unutilized space on our Johnson campus, because we're speaking about the Johnson campus here, to create a state-of-the-art nursing lab, which is going to bring nursing to Johnson for the first time. So we're really hoping that that will, increase enrollment on that campus. And we're really excited about that project. So there's a lot of really exciting work that's happening across the state when it comes to these congressionally directed spending requests, and we're very grateful for them and excited to see what happens with this one as well.
I didn't know if there's. What you were doing.
Can I speak?
Sure, please, of course.
Yeah, that was not clear. I just want to say thank you so much for your testimony and for your work. It's sad to hear about these empty buildings when we have this housing crisis. In health and welfare, we're always hearing about lack of spaces for folks who are struggling with addiction and health issues. And so it's hard to hear that we have empty buildings that aren't being used. And I also just want to acknowledge, like, it's really hard to talk about changing their purpose or, changing their use. But I know that we're going to be looking at that in the K through 12 landscape as well. And it's never an easy conversation, but it's really important. So thank you.
I think we're excited to be able to have the conversations that need to happen so we can figure out, which spaces really need to stay within our VTSU community and where can we, partner with other organizations to make hopefully some positive change, because there are so many issues that are plaguing our state right now. We need to do the work to have those conversations in our community. So I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Drake, thanks a million. Ms. Turner, thanks a million. Thank you. And I know we talked about having the chancellor back in the weeks ahead, just to check in before we adjourn, see how things are going, see how some of the things she feels like she's been able to advance or trying to advance, that sort of thing. I think would be a good thing for.
Yeah, she would love the opportunity to come back.
So when it's convenient for her, you work.
Yes,
with her.
yeah, I work for
I know
her.
she
Yes,
does
it
it
would be.
probably good. very busy schedule.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank-
Thanks, Ms. Turner.
Thank you all.